tonight our program has 4 parts. We have candidate introductions, which will come first, then rapid fire questions, and then moderated Q&A, and to end it, candidate free time, which I'm very excited about. Okay, let's get started with candidate introductions. Brian, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for being here, for Next Gen, for putting this on. It's so important right now at this time in our nation's history that we get young people engaged and involved in the process. And it's really exciting and inspiring to see that happen. So I try to speak at a different high school every single week to try and get as many young people engaged and part of the process. And when I do that, the questions they ask, the issues that our students care about now are the key issues we're focusing on in this campaign. Just today I was at Saugus High School and speaking to some of the organizers of the March for Our Lives, and also at Santa Sue and at Valencia High, and when you're at at Highland High School in the Antelope Valley, and half of the class that I was speaking to had lost their homes in the economic collapse. Palmdale was the foreclosure capital of California, and when we were at Canyon High School, there was a DACA rally that they were organizing at that time, which is so absolutely timely. And so you just see the students of today who are leading these fights for tomorrow. And it's a really exciting thing to be a part of, watching what has happened from Parkland with those students inspiring a nation and having it spread and having it come right here, with people who are saying they're fed up with the status quo, with the failure to actually get policies in place that are going to save lives. And it's a really, really hopeful time, I think, for our country, that we can harness this energy, follow the students' lead, and start to take this democracy back. And so I appreciate everything Next Gen is doing, and everybody here for being a part of that, because it's a really exciting time to be fighting for this country. Thank you.
Katie?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you guys so much for putting this on. Thank you to all of you who are here. I'm proud to be one of the youngest people who are running in one of these competitive races across the country. I'm 30. I fundamentally believe that until we get representation in Congress and at all levels of the millennial generation, which is, by the way, the largest voting bloc in the country, and yet we have 5 out of 435 seats in Congress. That's not okay. We're never going to be able to address the issues that we care about most and that, frankly, our world depends on if we don't have people who are impacted in the same way that we are. I also really believe that for us to mobilize the younger generation, that we need authenticity in politics. We need access and transparency in politics. That's why I'm happy that I have allowed the Vice News tonight to be here and to be following our campaign for 3 months now, I believe. And that episode just aired. It's going to be online soon, and they're really getting an inside look into what it's like to campaign. I hope y'all check that out, because I think that that's exactly what we need. We need to understand what politics is all about, all the good, the bad, and the ugly, and that's how we can change it. So thank you guys for being here.
You're up, Jess.
All right, so for those of you who I already know, hi, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jess Phoenix. You may know me as the volcano scientist running for Congress, and you may also know me, I've been on Discovery Channel, Science Channel. I run a nonprofit that I founded with my husband Carlos called Blueprint Earth. It does environmental science, research, and education. That's because I had a wonderful time with my education. I mean, anytime you're studying volcanoes, it's going to be fun. But I also had a great time at Cal State LA, both as a student and as a teacher there. And what I wanted to do with Blueprint Earth was remove barriers for people to enter the world of science. Because when you think of a scientist, you often think of an old guy in a lab coat. That's not me, you may notice. And that's not the future of science. To me, the future of science, and on a broader scale, the future of our society, looks like everybody in this audience. It's incredibly diverse. And one of the things that we know that is scientifically proven is that diversity leads to strength. We see better results in teams, better economic output, more inclusivity, and more opportunity. So that is actually one of the things that prompted me to run for Congress. Steve Knight, who I'm running against, is a climate science denier who sits on the House Science Committee. He doesn't have a degree in this field. He doesn't have any knowledge of this. And he's making decisions that will impact all of our lives for generations to come. He's even said California's preparations for climate change are foolish. I completely disagree. And the reason I'm running against Steve, one of many, many, many reasons, is that I can actually go to Congress and take his place on the House Science Committee. And that's what we need. We need different perspectives. We need science and evidence informing our policy making. So that's why I decided to leave the volcanoes, although Hawaii is pretty awesome right now, from a science perspective. Not so good if you live there. But this is more important than that. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I want to serve you.
Okay, great. Now we're going to move on to the rapid fire round. And I think we should maybe just pick an order in which you guys want to answer so that there's not chaos. Do you want to start Brian, Katie, Jess for all the answers? Does that sound good? Okay, so it's an either or, one-word answer questions, okay? Favorite ride at Magic Mountain?
X2, it's amazing.
Goliath. It's old school.
I puke on roller coasters.
Okay, In-N-Out burger or pizza?
In-N-Out.
It's a tough one. I'd go In-N-Out.
Grilled cheese animal style.
Okay, it's late at night and you and your staff are working it hard on a bill. What takeout do you order in?
Well, I haven't really spent any time in DC to be working on bills, so I don't know what's available.
Let's just, you know, think
Our
about it.
office is right next to Saugus Cafe, so we eat a lot of meals there, or Siam Rice.
I would say Thai food.
Comida mexicana.
Current Netflix binge watching.
Santa Clarita Diet.
Oh no. I haven't had a whole lot of time for binge watching lately, but I have rewatched not House of Cards, Breaking Bad recently.
Golden State Killer, it's not over. Serial killers, you know, the lightest of topics.
Okay, so what music is on your favorite playlist?
The Hamilton soundtrack right now.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm a big fan of A Perfect Circle. They've got a new album that's very political.
Bad Religion and the Glitch Mob.
Okay. And my personal favorite question, tequila or wine?
Probably wine.
The only person that I do tequila shots with is my father-in-law, so mostly wine.
I want to know your father-in-law.
Both, it depends on the day.
Good answer. Okay, so now we're going to move on to yes or no questions. So you're going to raise your hand if your answer is yes. Okay, and not raising your hand means your answer is no, and everyone in the audience can actually play along with this as well. If you raise your hand, your answer is yes, okay, to these questions. Do you support a woman's right to choose? Do you support a national paid family leave policy? Do you support employer-mandated contraception coverage? Do you support allowing transgender soldiers to serve in the military? Raise your hand if you refuse to take corporate PAC money. Would you have opposed the Republican tax plan had you been in Congress? Some people in there didn't raise their hands. Interesting. Would you oppose all tax breaks to large corporations or millionaires? How about support raising minimum wage? Raise your hand if you think Donald Trump is not fit for office. Raise your hand if you support California's decision to become a sanctuary city, or state, sorry. Do you support Black Lives Matter? Support the regulating carbon emissions from power plants? Raise your hand if you support the goal of transitioning to 100% clean energy by 2050. All right, so that was pretty easy. We're all, except for the tax plan one, that got a little gray area there, but that was pretty awesome. I would say we're all progressives.
Yeah.
Okay, now we are going to move on to the moderated Q&A. So you guys have 1 minute max response from each of you. And let's start with Katie. Healthcare costs for many Californians is a cause for concern. Republicans in Washington spent a large part of 2017 trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act. What would you do to lower out-of-pocket costs, including premiums and co-pays?
Well, ultimately, we need to get to Medicare for all, our single-payer system. How we get there is the question, and right now we need to take steps to preserve the ACA and put it so that it's actually working again and even improved over what it was before. But ultimately, the path needs to be to ensure that we can get to a place where every single person is covered. My own husband had a spontaneous lung collapse right before we got married and during the brief gap in health insurance. So when we got married, we started out our lives with $200,000 in medical debt. And that story should not be so common as it is right now.
Ryan?
I support a Medicare for all system, and I think we need to get there without delay. We have a great system right now for people over 65 that is efficient, it keeps costs down, it has very high favorability rates, and we should expand that to every single person in this country. It would save an amazing amount of money. It allows the government to negotiate drug prices, so we no longer have people deciding between putting food on the table for their kids or getting prescription medicine, and it is actually much, much, much less expensive than our current out-of-control healthcare system where insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, and so many others just take profit off of the health of people in our community. And that's wrong, and we need to get away from that and get to Medicare for all as quickly as possible.
Jess?
I've been for Medicare for all since I started my campaign, and that's because with a scientist's lens on, you can really see that it makes fiscal sense. So there's a really good economic argument to be made for making sure every single person in our country is covered. In addition to that, we need to make sure that we're actively working to lower costs right now, which is, I think, what the question was. So that means we need to have the government step in and help to cap prescription drug prices so that they don't shoot up astronomically high. Sometimes we've actually seen drugs increase in price by 10,000%. That is not affordable, that is not sustainable, that is putting profits way over people. So I think the government can do an immediate regulatory role here to actually make sure that prescription drug companies are not gouging regular people who need these drugs to survive. I think that's a right-away thing we can do. And of course, when the blue wave hits, Medicare for all is coming your way.
Do any of you believe in single payer? Yes? Okay, awesome. So Jess, younger Americans are increasingly aware of just how broken our criminal justice system is. What would you do to reform the system?
So we need to tackle a few different areas. Obviously, we've heard buzzwords like school to prison pipeline, and we've heard, criminal justice reform, mass incarceration. They're not just buzzwords, those are people's lives. And one of the key things that we need to address is bail reform. Right now, a lot of people are held for indefinite periods of time. It can be a year or more, and they're not even charged with a crime formally. And bail costs are so exorbitant that they're not able to pay them. So this is something we need to address immediately because it affects disproportionately people from low-income communities and people from communities of color. And it's a real problem right now. So bail reform would be a top priority of mine. And then also, we really need to make sure that we are decriminalizing marijuana. That is a huge thing at the federal level, because so many people are put in jail for minor marijuana offenses that we can also look at expunging their records for those same things that I'd like to decriminalize now. It would help the criminal justice system immensely.
Katie?
Great points that Jess made. Another thing that I think we really have to talk about is having a system that is truly focused on rehabilitation and recovery. I started out my career with the LA Conservation Corps, which focuses on serving people who are exiting the foster care and the criminal justice system. And it's about ensuring that people have actual opportunities to turn their lives around. Currently, we're warehousing people. The efforts that we need to make in terms of ensuring that people have those opportunities include investing in education in the criminal justice system, investing in, most importantly, mental health and substance abuse services, because there are so many people who are incarcerated because they have what is really a medical condition, and we need to treat it as such.
Yeah, I had the luck to work for a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and half the cases you get there are immigration cases or criminal sentencing cases because of the sentencing guidelines and the draconian mandatory minimums that are required now under that system. And what I saw so clearly when working on these cases was just how broken the systems are and how they disproportionately affect people of color, tearing families and communities apart. And that's wrong. And we need to get in there and have real reform of these sentencing guidelines. It's one of the reasons I'd like to sit on the Judiciary Committee in Congress. That's where that reform happens. We just need to do it. The disparities between how people are treated based on their backgrounds, based on where they come from, is outrageous and shouldn't stand in this country. And we need people to get in office who understand that, who understand how these lies can affect people the wrong way, and can really make a difference on that.
Brian, you talked before about going to high schools and meeting with students, and too many students graduate with massive amounts of debt. What would you do to help current and future students?
Yeah, it's a horrible problem. Lisa and I both graduated hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from law school. I support debt-free college for every person, and beyond just tuition-free college, which some people talk about, because there are so many more expenses that come with going to school. Your room and board, your books, there's so much more. So we need to have a system with debt-free college for every person who wants to go. And we can get there by shifting priorities. You know, we talked about the tax plan from a couple months ago. They found $1.5 trillion that they could give away to banks and corporations and billionaires. Let's shift that and invest in the future of tomorrow. And for people who have already gone to college, who still have that debt, you know, saddled around their neck like an albatross, there's stuff we can do there also. The government should not be making a profit on interest rates for student loans. You should be able to discharge your student loans in bankruptcy. You should be able to refinance, and we should have a very robust loan forgiveness program for people who go into a broad array of public service. There's no reason any person shouldn't be able to go to college because of cost. We need to make that a reality.
Both of my grandparents, the way that my family made it out of poverty was because they were able to leave the small towns that they had in the Midwest and get into a college with a GI Bill or a military, based on their military service. That opportunity led to one of my grandfathers becoming a UCLA political science professor after going to Princeton on a full ride scholarship, and one of my grandfathers becoming a rocket scientist who worked on the space shuttle in the Apollo series. If people have access to education without cost being a barrier, then we can truly bring back the middle class. We can transform so many lives. That has to be a top priority. In terms of current debt, we need to have true debt forgiveness programs, including we've had a program in place in the past where public service allows you to forgive your debt, and that is something that the Trump administration has attacked tremendously. I had social workers working for me at PATH who were on a 10-year plan to discharge the rest of their debt. That's a program that we really need to boost up and ultimately get to a place where every single person who wants to get an education, whether it's through college or trade school, that cost is never a barrier.
I believe that education, public education, shouldn't be operated for profit. I think that's a really big point. I have a problem with schools like Trump for-profit colleges that I believe the federal government can play a role in cracking down on what they do, again, disproportionately to students of color, in taking them for a ride and saddling them with debt that they can't discharge. And so we need to step in and say, that's not how our country gets stronger. Our country is strong when we have a well-educated population. And so I think it's a fundamental aspect of our society. In fact, it's the foundation of American success to have an educated public. People used to be able to work a summer job and pay for college. We need that to be a reality again. We need to have debt-free college, tuition-free college, and make sure people can discharge loans in bankruptcy and maybe discharge the ones that they still have. Just saying. Not that I have any right now. Yes, I do.
So switching gears a little bit here, the Me Too movement has brought a lot of attention to problems of sexual assault and harassment. Let's start with you, Jess. How has the Me Too movement impacted you personally?
Well, I can say, unfortunately, that yes, me too. And you know, it's not easy to pick your life up and put it back in line when you go through something harrowing as a teenager. And again, and I will say that what I've tried to do is be a role model for the young people I work with through Blueprint Earth. I try to give them resources and access and help. And my best friend, actually, I met her at our job that we worked at together at the Hartford Insurance Company years ago. And she came into work one day all flustered, and I barely knew her at that point. And I saw what was wrong. I saw something was wrong, and I went up and I got the story out of her, and her boyfriend had held a loaded gun to her face in front of her 4-year-old. So I said, you can't stay there. And I made a plan. I got some of the guys in our office. We got a U-Haul. We went to her house. I stared down her crazy boyfriend who was roid raging and said, you have to go because I'm not letting her be a statistic. And we're still friends to this day. So the Me Too movement, I think, affects everyone in some way.
Also, this is something that I believe is one of the best things that has come out of the Me Too movement is women being able to share their stories. And early on in this campaign, I felt like that was something that was important to me. So I shared a story about when I was 16 years old. I was in high school and I had a TA for a class that was an ROP class outside of school, and had instances of unwanted touches, unwanted aggression, I guess. And I ended up getting into a car accident because of it. And it was something that had a huge impact on my life, and that I had a great deal of shame around. I thought that there's the victim blaming that goes on with it. But the point is, this is a moment where we truly need to show our stories. We need to allow women to have a voice. We need to make sure that we have equal representation at all levels of government if we want to make these changes on an ongoing basis. And when we have less than 20% of Congress made up of women, we're never going to get there.
It's been really inspiring to see so many women come forward to tell their stories. It's also been horrifying to see some of these people in power and what they've been doing for so long. And it's great to see them fall. And it's really important that we as Democrats, we as people who believe in equality, who want to move into that truly equal society that we don't have, that we make sure we hold people accountable of our own side. Whether it's the Attorney General in New York, whether it's Al Franken, whatever the case is, we need to make sure that we do hold people accountable to show that we mean this and that we want real, true change. And that we're going to fight to put women in positions of power. I'm proud that on my campaign, 2/3 of my senior staff positions are held by women. The only female campaign manager in this race is on my team. And we need to just keep making sure that we promote and amplify women's voices so that we get to the equality we don't have right now.
Since the tragedy at Stoneman Douglas, young people have obviously been leading the way to pass common sense gun reform. What would you all do to ensure that our schools, theaters, public places are safe from gun violence? Do you want to start, Brian?
Sure. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but it has been amazingly inspiring to see the students from Parkland lead this charge. It's taken over the country. It's happening right here throughout this entire district. It is a really, really inspiring thing, and they are showing the adults that we don't need to settle for what we've been dealing with. We don't have to keep waking up to these massacres, and there is a lot that we can do. Nobody should go to school scared, and so we should have an assault weapons ban and bump stocks and silencers. We should have universal background checks. We should make sure we raise the age from 18 to 21. We should have a 14-day waiting period. There are things we can do. Get the funding back to the CDC so they can conduct the research and get the actual science behind what would be most effective. The only thing standing in our way are elected officials beholden to the corporate gun lobby. The American public is behind us. The concern of the American people is there. We just need people with the willpower to start saving lives.
So Brian listed off the policies that I think are all completely aligned in terms of universal background checks, in terms of what kind of weapons should get into the hands of civilians, in terms of waiting periods, ensuring that people who are experiencing crisis of some kind, that there are mechanisms in place to make sure that they can't go buy a weapon. But one of the things that I think we really have to highlight is that the vast majority of Americans, including gun owners, are in favor of these same measures, these same common sense measures. I'm a gun owner. I grew up in a family of law enforcement. I grew up with guns, but because of that, I'm able to talk to people who are often afraid that Democrats are trying to take away the Second Amendment, and that's just not true, because all we really want is to ensure that our communities and our kids are safe, and that's something that is frankly a completely American value.
Gun reform isn't a political talking point whatsoever for me. It is a personal matter that I actually really have taken to heart, because some of you know, some of you may not. When I was 17, I knew people who were killed in the Columbine shootings because I went to school down the street. I will tell you that it's taken 19 years, but I'm here running for Congress. So we didn't know what to do then as students in that era. We didn't have social media. We didn't have a way to connect and broadcast our message around the country. The students now have that message, they have the voice, and they have the power. So in addition to some of the other things that these folks have said, I want to ban centerfire semi-automatic rifles. That's very specific. It is very detailed, because that says exactly what I do not want to see in people's hands. But I also want to make sure that we are studying the causes and solutions to gun violence, because if we find something isn't working, we need to change it. That is how you make an informed policy decision that saves lives.
Let's just take a moment and really work on this one for a second, because I'd love for you each to go down and tell everybody what gun reform means to you, what exactly you would put in place. Because we talk about this issue in particular in a very generalized way, but it never really gets specific, and therefore I feel like that's what gives the NRA the strength to create this narrative that we want to take away all their guns and we don't believe in the Second Amendment. So let's break it down. Let's really talk about what it means to each of you. What does gun reform look like for each of you? Jess, go ahead.
Okay, so like I said, I'll just list it off. Banning centerfire semi-automatic rifles, limiting magazine capacities for rifles to 6 and for handguns to 10, making sure that we institute a mandatory nationwide 14-day waiting period, that we ban concealed carry reciprocity nationwide. We should not have that. That we actually we close the background check loopholes. We close the no-fly, no-buy loophole. If you're on the terror watch list, you probably shouldn't be buying a gun. You can go through an adjudication process to get that right back. But we also need to make sure that we are taking weapons away from people who have been convicted of domestic violence. That is absolutely key. And I want to explore, I don't want to say that we want to do it just yet, but I want to explore licensing and registration and insurance requirements for firearms. There's some data out there that suggests it could disproportionately harm the ability of people of color and low-income communities to carry weapons legally. So we don't want to restrict that. But those are things I really want to explore and what I would like to do.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we're pretty much on the same page with these issues, but for me, one of the 14-day waiting period is so important. I lost a good friend to suicide by gun, and you know, we don't know if that could have been prevented if this were in place, but it certainly is something that we need to be looking at. Ensuring that family members have the ability to put restrictions in place so that if they have a loved one who's experiencing some kind of crisis, whether it's mental health or violence or anything like that, that they have an ability to notify agencies so that they can't go purchase weapons. We need to ensure that we don't need assault weapons. We just don't as civilians. We don't need high capacity magazines. We don't need bump stocks. We don't need silencers. Those are things that are simply not meant for the regular public to have. What am I missing? We need to, background checks, universal background checks. The rates of violence among people who are domestic abusers is astronomical, and that can't be overemphasized. And along those lines, the concealed carry reciprocity is something that we should never have, because it takes away the local law enforcement agency's ability to say who should be able to get a weapon in our community. And we have scary places like Florida where there are almost no restrictions on who can buy a gun.
You know, Alyssa, you kind of cut into my creative section at the end. I actually have poster boards and demonstratives for this exact topic at the end. So I don't want to cut into that too much and bore people with duplicity. But I would just say, you know, I agree on a lot of those issues. We absolutely need to ban assault weapons, bump stocks, and silencers. We need to have a 14-day waiting period. The evidence is very clear that just having a waiting period, not keeping a gun away from anyone, but putting that 14-day period would save 1,000 lives every year, just from reducing the number of suicides. We could save those lives starting tomorrow if we had elected officials who are willing to take a stand. We need to have universal background checks on every single purchase, and if you are a domestic abuser, if you have mental health issues, if you're a suspected terrorist, you shouldn't be able to purchase a firearm. And we need to make sure that we put the investments into that background check system so that we have trained personnel making sure it operates smoothly so nobody slips through the cracks like happened in Texas, where 30 people were killed when that person never should have been able to purchase a weapon. So there are just a lot of common sense things that have widespread national support that would start saving lives, but we don't have a Congress who will do it.
It's still not Keep trying. Keep trying.
You can make the noise when we go over.
That's true. Then I'd have to look at the clock. Yeah. Let's move on to immigration. So as we all know, Donald Trump has attempted to phase out the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA program. Would you be willing to fund Trump's border wall or additional ICE agents in exchange for the DREAM Act?
Let's start.
You want to start?
Sure, I'll start.
Okay.
Look, Trump's wall is never going to happen. It's physically impossible. It's something that is really just used as an attempt to garner support from people who frankly don't want people who look different from them to be in our country. So I would never agree to fund Trump's border wall, but I would agree to fund additional border security, because I believe that we need to provide solutions to the people who are in limbo, the DACA recipients, and those who should be eligible for DACA. We need to give them answers right away. I don't think that we should put this on hold until we get something that is exactly what it needs to be, because I don't think people can wait for years. So in terms of additional border security, what that should be focused on is illegal drug trafficking, illegal weapons trafficking, and illegal sex trafficking. That's what we really should be concerned about, not people who are desperate for a better opportunity in life who are coming across our borders.
Yes, I've been saying, well, since he proposed the wall, I mean, I'm a geologist. Geologically, it is an impossibility. You literally cannot build a wall that is thousands of miles long across those particular formations and strata. So not happening. But what I think is the important thing to take away is that we're talking about human lives again, and we cannot be willing to compromise human lives for an economic issue, right? So if it is get people who are, DACA recipients, DACA eligible, the chance to stay here and keep living their lives versus throwing some money at a wall that won't get built, fine. Throw the money at the wall. I would prefer not to waste the money, but again, the benefits and the economic impact of keeping our DACA recipients and DACA eligible folks, even just here in our community, there's 5,100 plus of DACA folks here, right here in the 25th, and that's $159 million a year in economic loss that we would see if they were gone. So if you don't get the humanitarian angle, go for the economic angle. Oh my God. All right.
There, I like it. Okay. Brian.
No, I'm not going to vote to fund the wall. To me, this is, it's a fundamental value that we have to take a stand as Democrats, as Americans, and say we are not going to put that symbol up. We need to get a Clean Dream Act with a pathway to citizenship. The deadline that was set was March 5th. We got through that because the Supreme Court kicked it a little bit. It's really frustrating that Congress has not been able to get this through yet. I mean, this is something that 60–70% of Americans agree that our dreamers are American in every sense of the term, except for a piece of paper, and they need that pathway to citizenship. And there is no excuse whatsoever for Democrats not standing firm on this and pushing it through to get that citizenship. Then we need to address the other 10–11 million people who are in this country and start reforming that broken immigration system and make sure that we are creating a pathway there for those people who want to be a part of this country, who want to become citizens, to get on that pathway to do so.
We're so close to the buzzer. Did you see that? Yeah, one more second. So I think we all know that Republicans right now in this administration have been looking to roll back many actions that the Obama administration took to address climate change. And it's been quite horrifying, I think, for all of us to watch in the past year, those things being rolled back. So I want to know, what actions would you guys take to address climate change and to fix what he's basically broken right now? Jess, you can start.
So obviously the first thing we need to do is get back into the Paris Agreement, but I do want you all to know that even if we fully comply with the Paris Agreement guidelines, that we still have to do something about the excessive atmospheric carbon that exists. That is still a problem. So we need to heavily invest in carbon dioxide removal technology. That means techniques like pyrolysis, where they actually are able to burn waste to generate energy from it. And it removes CO2 from the atmosphere in the process. It's pretty amazing. That's what we need to be doing, and in order to accomplish that, I actually have a vision for our community right here in the 25th District, where we can be a global hub for green technology research and development. So things like pyrolysis, making sure we get the next generation of wind and solar harvesting technologies, and then making sure that it'll provide jobs for the community too. So you really take the lemon and you turn it into lemonade if you get the economy behind finding solutions to the changing climate, and also acknowledging that it is the greatest threat to national security that we are going to see in our lifetimes.
This is about whether we have a planet for our generation and future generations to live on. It's that simple. We have to get back to the Paris Climate Accords. We have to get to a place where we have 100% renewable energy by 2050, and we need to make the investments accordingly. We need to ensure that we are properly funding the EPA, because ultimately the government's job is to protect our citizens from big corporations who ultimately have profits ahead of anything else. And I think part of that needs to be talking about campaign finance reform and whether those companies are able to buy elections, because that's happening. Big oil, all of those kinds of companies are truly influencing our politicians in a way that should never be possible. So we need to be fighting for all of those things simultaneously, but we always have to keep our eye on the ball by investing in green technology to ensure that we're able to get to this completely renewable energy by 2050.
Donald Trump Trump is launching an all-out attack on California, on the planet, on science. We see that with the offshore drilling, that he gives waivers and exemptions to red states, but he wants to do it here. He's rolling back the mileage standards beyond what the auto industry even wants. It doesn't make any sense. It is just because of the money from the big oil that wants it to happen. We can take steps to that. Yes, get in the Paris Climate Accord. You have the Aliso Canyon gas leak located here in this district, which released an astronomical amount of methane gas that is just horrible, horrible for climate change. So I've already drafted a proposed piece of legislation to respond to that leak and the other 400 natural gas storage facilities across this country to make sure that we have better safeguards in place and monitoring so we never have a horrific leak again like that in the future. We need to start taking steps, move to 100% renewable. Lancaster is going to be net zero by 2020, and the rest of the country needs to follow its lead.
Thank you for that. We're going to switch gears again, and we're going to talk about women in the United States who work full-time, year-round, are only paid 80 cents for every dollar paid to men. And for women of color, the wage gap is even larger. What would you do to ensure that there is pay equality? Katie?
Yeah. Well, again, this comes down to who's in leadership positions, because when we see women in equal numbers of leadership positions, that pay gap goes away in a tremendous way. So we really need to focus on that. I was an employer for over 400 people, and we looked at how people are paid. This was before California passed its equal pay legislation pretty recently. And the fact is, if employers are using a woman's or anybody's former salary history as part of how they determine compensation, then you are going to have a skew, because women they start out lower, and that is something that impacts them all the way throughout their careers as long as you're using past history as the guide. So California made a change so that we aren't able to use that kind of history to be able to determine salaries. That needs to happen nationally. On top of that, I think we have to really talk about what the culture is around parenting and around family life, because when you're looking at the primary burden being placed on a woman, then she's seen as someone who's not going to be necessarily someone who's always there. And I think that has to change. We need to have family leave for
Brad?
We need to have robust equal pay for equal work legislation that's passed. And Katie's right, California has taken really good steps on this, but it only applies in this state. We need to take it nationally. One aspect of that is making sure that you can't ask about prior pay. Another has to do with when you actually get involved in a lawsuit and who has the burden of proof of showing whether there has been pay discrimination, and making sure that we recognize that the employer is the one in the position holding the evidence. And we need to make it easier for women who have been discriminated against to present their claims, to make sure that they are able to get representation and access to justice. Because right now, the legal system is far too complicated, the rules are not strong enough, and there just simply isn't that access to justice that so many people need, and that allows these employers to continue discriminating against women far too long and far too much, and we need to get rules to stop that.
Stop.
I did.
So it's interesting to note that a lot of other countries that have different culture around women in the workplace have much lower gaps, if any at all. The culture I'm talking about is two things. One is that we still haven't ratified the Equal Rights Act. So it's still technically not illegal to discriminate based on gender, in this case, women. So that is a problem. We are very close to having enough states ratify it so that it can actually be part of our law, but we're not quite there yet. Illinois is working its way there, so cheer for Illinois. But we really need to make sure that we actually have family leave, paid parental leave, and it has to be much better than it is right now. When my mother was working at the FBI, she actually had only 6 weeks for me and my brother after she had us. And she had to go back and supervise a team of FBI agents afterwards. And that's not enough time to bond with your baby. So we need to make sure that we are including parental leave for any kind of couple, LGBTQ, straight, any sort. It's just fundamental.
This is kind of an interesting question, but I'm fascinated to hear your answers, especially after it seems like most of you guys align pretty well with most of the issues. On what issue do you disagree with the Democratic Party?
Sure, I'll go first. For me, the thing that I've been most frustrated with over the last 10 years is the fact that not one single person was criminally prosecuted for causing the financial collapse. Now, actually, a lot of that came because the Attorney General in New York, who just stepped down, and a lot of that happened just because Democrats, and far too many of them, have been cozy with Wall Street, and they accept really big contributions from the banks, from the financial institutions. And Republicans are certainly worse on this issue. But Democrats haven't been enough, and not done enough. Not all Democrats are the same. We had this economic collapse. We had people losing houses like crazy. We had banks out of control, and they passed Dodd-Frank. And that was good, it was something, but it was pretty modest actually, and it didn't go far enough. And just a couple weeks ago, they tried to roll back those very modest Dodd-Frank protections in the Senate, and something like 15, 17 Democrats voted for that. That's a problem. We need to stand up for people, not banks, not corporations, not billionaires. We need to stand with people and make sure that that economic collapse can never happen again.
I'll go next. It's a similar issue. I think a space where I really disagree with the Democratic Party is how we're looking for candidates. Because we need to be looking for candidates who are not just self-funders, which is one of the most important designations of whether the Democratic Party and any party is going to support you, is because if you have the ability to fundraise, if you have the ability to write yourself massive checks, then that means that the Democratic Party doesn't have to fundraise for you. And there's way too much emphasis placed on that right now. Thank you. we need to look for candidates who fit their district, who have the right expertise, experience, background, whatever it takes, and help support them by giving them the resources to be able to successfully fundraise. I think that's something that we've all experienced. I'm proud to have a campaign that is funded by over 5,200 individual donors, where our average donation is just about $100, but that's what it takes to be able to build a campaign for people who aren't wealthy. I come from my dad's a police officer, my mom's a nurse, and frankly, they don't have a lot of rich friends, and neither do I.
So when I started running, I was told to do things a certain way. Spend a bunch of time every day doing call time, 10 to 12 hours in a lot of cases, calling rich people asking for money. And I don't have a network of wealthy donor friends. The party people were the ones who were telling me to do this. And I rejected that idea because I said, you know what? I'm a scientist. Scientists usually survive on academic salaries. They're not that great for those of you who may be teachers or know people who are. So my network can give about $45 a pop. And so that's actually what we've done. It's a full grassroots campaign. I think I only had about 20-something people write checks for the maximum amount. I have over about 7,000 donors right now. I want to say over, but I'm not quite sure if it's there or not yet. But over 7,000 individuals with an average donation of $45. That is a true grassroots campaign, and that scares people sometimes in the party because if you're not beholden to the people with the purse strings, you can say what you want to say.
Brian, I'm really curious about this question, this answer from you. So what is the most embarrassing thing that has happened to you on the campaign trail? Besides that buzzer.
I don't know, I think we should maybe ask Lisa about that. She might be able to tell you. There are a lot. Running for office is hard. There's no question about that. It's a lot of hard work. It is a crazy, scary world right now where I literally think the future of our republic is at risk, and there can be a lot of hard times as you deal with that. But spending time hearing stories from so many people who don't have a voice right now in our broken system, and knowing that you are out there fighting for them really invigorates me. And another 30 seconds to go.
Nothing embarrassing like your fly was down and nobody told you?
Well, if they didn't tell me,
Okay, go on. Sorry I interrupted you.
You know, I walk a lot, actually, knocking doors and whatnot, and I took the Metrolink from the AV to Santa Clarita, and I got off, and while I was getting off, the heel of my shoe fell off, and I tripped right there in the train station. That was a little bit embarrassing, but I felt good because it meant I was knocking so many doors that I literally worn my shoes out.
So that was good.
There you
so
go.
you did it with a lip. See, I knew you had one. Katie?
Yeah, I think, again, running for office is hard, and for the last 3 months I've had a film crew following me around. So you see, when you're tired, you kind of forget that there's cameras when they're around all the time. And I've definitely gotten caught on camera saying some things that I probably wouldn't like. In fact, I know I wouldn't like my mother or my father to hear. So some of those were recently aired last night, and I think that's probably...
Like what?
What?
Like what?
Oh, I cuss a lot.
You do? You have a potty mouth?
I have a potty mouth.
I would have never guessed that.
Really?
Awesome. Jess?
Yeah, so I have totally called somebody the wrong name, and that mortifies me because you're meeting thousands of people, and it's really hard when they're like, oh my God, that thing that you were at where I met you and it was so great, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, who are you? You know, but I will admit it, I will go, I don't remember your name, I'm really sorry, and it really makes me feel bad because I hate it when people forget my name, but I'm like, hey, just call me Red if you do, because, you know, it's obvious. But that's the thing, is you just, you know, you gotta just go with it. You can't have a lot of personal shame or embarrassment if you're running for public office, especially in this day and age with social media everywhere. I mean, you're on TV, like, you just have to go with it. You're a real person, and people want to see that. Like, they want to see when you...
I was on TV during the 80s.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
So,
all right. Slightly...
Like, everyone saw my embarrassing moments.
Because everyone watched TV then. Now it's like, oh no, I don't do that, you know?
Well, thank you guys so much. This has been really enlightening for me. Does anyone, they didn't say that I could do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for candidates? Okay, I'll come down and give you a mic. So spur of the moment, aren't I?
Hi, Brian, this is for you. How did you feel about when President Trump cut back the reduction in the mortgage insurance premium? Presently, the mortgage insurance premium is 0.85, and it does affect the consumer and their ability to buy a home. How did you feel about that?
Look, I think that the entire process of what he did is bad for people here in California. I think that it is bad for homeowners in California, and I have had a lot of homeowners who have come up to me over the last 4 or 5 months, Republicans who have said, you know, I voted for Steve Knight last time, and I voted for him because I was able to set aside all these issues over here, but I thought he was going to lower my taxes, and so I voted for him, and now I've seen that they didn't even do that. They own a home here, I pay taxes here, and now I'm paying much more money. And the home that I thought I was able to afford, now I can't, and don't know how it's going to affect the home market going forward. And so I've had that conversation with a lot of people who are former Republican voters who have seen what this administration and this member of Congress has done to hurt families in this area, and are going to the other side.
Let me do a follow-up to that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would also like to give Jeff and Katie an opportunity to answer the question.
So the mortgage insurance premium is actually something that I had to deal with very recently because I'm a relatively recent homeowner, and it was, you know, that is something that can actually help people a lot, that reduction. However, I think it's dramatically offset, particularly in California's case, with the elimination of the state and local tax deduction and the mortgage interest deduction that they're eliminating. So I don't think it does enough good necessarily to outweigh the bad that we're seeing from the different reforms he's proposed, particularly because the mortgage insurance premium only applies if you have paid less than 20% down on your home. So it only affects a small portion of people. However, I think the worst things that he has entered into the equation here with this GOP tax bill, I think they do a lot more harm than the good we see with the reduction in the mortgage interest premium, mortgage insurance premium. Hi, I can talk.
Yeah, look, we have to do everything we possibly can to make homeownership possible for more people, because crises, like the affordable housing crisis here in California, which leads to homelessness. We have the largest number of people experiencing homelessness in our state than anywhere across the country, 60,000 people just here in LA County. That's because at all levels housing isn't affordable enough. And the more people who are unable to buy homes, the more pressure there is on the rental market. And the higher rents are, the lower vacancy rates are, the more people who are pushed onto the margins and ultimately become homeless. So it has to be one of our biggest legislative priorities moving into the next decades, because if we don't deal with this, if we don't deal with housing affordability across the board, then we will see the biggest crisis of people living on the streets in our history.
This is a question for all the candidates. Who are the people you respect and why?
Sure. That's a good question. I think there are so many people that I look up to. My family is in particular one that has had a huge impact on me. I think leading with service is something that's been ingrained into me from the very youngest possible days. And I want to thank my mom, my dad, my stepdad who are here tonight. But I think, really one thing that I've experienced the most in my career working with people who are marginalized, frankly, is seeing the heroic actions of people who have lifted them, who have really gotten their lives back together, and when no one believed in them anymore. We had over and over again, we've seen people who were living on the streets who someone wouldn't even shake their hand, wouldn't make eye contact with them, but because of the help that they got, the opportunities that we as a country were able to help them with, and those opportunities need to be expanded across the board, made it possible for them to inspire me in the most incredible ways. So I think those are ones that are important too.
So I'm going to actually be kind of a dork, and I'm going to say my husband Carlos, and I might make him get embarrassed, but so Carlos, when I met him, one of the first things I learned about him was that he had gone to Claremont McKenna College. It's a really good school, and I didn't really think too much about it until we got to talking and I learned more about his background. Carlos was born, his mom came from Mexico and his dad came from Colombia, and his mom was here and she didn't have documentation. So his parents were almost split up when he was 6, but then President Reagan gave amnesty to a lot of people who were in the country without documents. His dad was a janitor and his mom was a cake decorator, and they didn't care about school. They told him to just become a bank teller. That was the best job he could possibly get. But he went to college anyway, and he didn't even speak English till he was 6, and he was born here in California. And this is a guy who is the smartest person and the most caring person, the most amazing person I've ever met. And he now speaks 5.5 languages and is a business guy. He's awesome.
A lot of respect for my parents, who were both public school teachers, who dedicated their lives to helping improve the students and leaders of the next day, and helped give me every opportunity to succeed. My amazing wife Lisa, who this would not be possible without, who is an amazing attorney for the city of Los Angeles and is such a rock on this campaign, and who makes this life enjoyable every day, is so wonderful. At a broad ticket, Michelle Obama is absolutely phenomenal. Give it up for Michelle Obama. And watching the way that she carried herself for the 8 years in office in the face of some of the most vile attacks imaginable, and to still go out there and be such an impressive leader and inspire a nation and actually the world as a whole was really phenomenal to watch.
I just have to say, Kenny, I'm really sorry that I didn't give you a shout out now. My husband is also quite amazing. Thank you.
I just want to thank you for moderating this panel, Alyssa. I'm familiar with your activism, but you're really good at interviewing too. I think you should get a news talk show. I would watch your hell out of it. Guys, I know this has been a contentious primary, and so this might be kind of a hard question for you. But this is a very uplifting evening, hearing you guys talk, and each of you brings so much to the table. Obviously, you think you are the person who should represent this district in Congress, but you've all committed to supporting whoever the Democratic nominee is. So if you are not the nominee, can you say something about the other two candidates that you think would make them better than Steve Knight?
Yeah, I can go first. I've said this before. I think that these guys are incredibly smart, and I'm proud to be up on this stage with them. I think that each has their own expertise that they bring to the table. Just being able to bring real science experience to Washington, I think, is incredibly important, especially when we do have someone like Steve Knight who doesn't have that. And Brian, I think with your legal background, you're going to be able to write policies a lot faster than the rest of us. So I think, either way, I think we ultimately have a great opportunity here to get somebody elected to our community and to our country, and I'm proud to be here with either one of them.
Well, these guys are some of the most persistent people I have ever met. So if we're going with the vein of nevertheless she persisted, nevertheless they persisted. They are dedicated, and they show up to these things. They are articulate and passionate, and I think that what we need is people like anybody up on this stage, but these guys are, we were just talking backstage about normal stuff, sports, and just goofy things, and that is the cool thing, is that they're regular people too. They're normal people. They're not like, corporate automatons programmed to do what you say. These are people with lives, with families, and with dreams and hopes and goals, and I think that sending people who are fundamentally good, unique, interesting people to Congress is going to do us a lot of good in the future.
Steve Knight is really bad. Like really bad. On a lot of issues, he's really bad. It's hard to think of issues that he's good on. And I think he's really let this community down in so many ways. And one of the most fundamental ways, look, there are tough issues out there. People disagree, and it's fine to disagree. You're not going to get along on 100% of the issues. But what you need in an elected official is someone who is willing to listen. Someone who is willing to talk to the other side and engage with the other side and have a discussion to explain their vote. And Steve Knight doesn't do that. Many people here have gone to his office to use our First Amendment right to petition, and he pulls down the blinds, locks the door, and calls the sheriff's department. And that is so wrong, and these two are not going to do that. They're here, and they answer questions, and they talk to you, and listen, and we might disagree on some issues, and we do disagree on some issues, and they're going to disagree with you on some issues, but I know they're not going to lock the door and pull down the blinds the way Steve Knight does, and that's just the fundamental wrong way to be a representative.
That is a true story, actually, because I protested with the Dreamers, and we came to Steve Knight's office. He would not answer the door. That's a true story. He closed the blinds. He wanted nothing to do with us. He hid in his office. His staff took the other route out of their office, so they didn't have to deal with us. That's exactly right. That is a true story. Oh, yeah.
Thank you for the verification.
Yes. I just had to be there with you. Yes.
My name is Glenn Gomez. I'm an elected official for the Boston School District. My stand is, where do you guys stand on charter schools? That's a public entity, where you come from, those kind of things.
You said, where do we stand on charter schools?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, I'm a product of public schools. My parents were both public school teachers. I am a big proponent of our public school system, and I think it is an absolute disgrace the way that our government, and our federal government in particular, has failed to fund public education. And we need to make sure we are getting more investment in our public schools. So I don't believe the way to improve public schools is to take money away from that. But that being said, there are some good success stories out there. With charter schools, there are also some real horror stories. So what you need to do is make sure that the schools that are there have transparency, have accountability, have a staff that's able to unionize and make sure they are treated fairly, and make sure that with that accountability and oversight, we aren't messing around with kids' lives. Because when a charter school fails, that is a whole lot of kids who lost an opportunity to get ahead. And so we can't be doing things that take money away from public schools and have the risk of leaving so many other children behind. We need to find what works, promote what works, but really invest in our public schools to make sure every single child has the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm also a product of public schools. I went to all local schools out here. The fact is that charter schools, unfortunately, right now take away resources from public schools and leave the most needy students, the ones who really need the most investment. And we have to change that. We have to ensure that our public schools are getting fully resourced. And I think it's really concerning to privatize education. To privatize a public good across the board it's a risky undertaking, and I think that that's something that we have to really consider, is that if there's a way for someone to make money off of something like education, then that's not okay, because we will always have problems. I do think, though, that there are certain examples. When I was at the LA Conservation Corps, there was a charter school that was part of it, and it was specifically targeted to people who were exiting the foster care system, who were coming out of situations that were really tough. So they had specialized education for that, and I think that, you know, there are opportunities like that, but you do have to ensure complete transparency and accountability, and ensure that those resources that we know we don't have enough of are staying with the public schools that are helping the most needy people.
So I am an educator. I've actually taught in the classroom at the college and at the elementary level. And one of the things that I've said from the beginning of this race is I will fight the Betsy DeVos agenda of privatizing schools like tooth and nail. And that is just, I mean, what is being done right now in terms of cutting public school monies to try to pump money into CMOs, charter management organizations, and charter schools in general, and privatizing education is criminal. We need to have access to public education, quality public education. So if we do have public charters, they must be accountable and transparent, and they cannot take funding from regular public schools. That is where I stand on the issue, because the most fundamental thing that we have going for us as America is the ability to educate every student, so we gotta protect that.
Well, thank you all so much. We are at the final part of our program, which is candidate free time, which means that you actually have 1 free minute to do whatever you want for your closing statement. So you can give like a standard closing statement.
1 minute or 2?
Or it says 1, but let's do 2.
Oh,
let's do 2.
Right, I don't know.
We're doing 2. You can give a closing statement. You can do a special skill. You could show us your dog if you have any doggies that are here. Whatever. You really like dogs. So whatever you guys want to do. Who wants to start?
I mean, I may have a dog here, just saying. So can we bring the dog? No.
Okay,
Wiggles. No, her name isn't Wiggles. You can tell her now. Just let her know.
Tell us about your dog.
Here. So this is Aria, also known as Wiggles and Gooby and a bunch of other names. I don't even know how to say them when I'm not baby talking. But Aria is a Chiweenie. We rescued her. She was dumped when Carlos and I were walking in front of the Pasadena Humane Society. The reason I'm telling you guys about it is because I've been doing animal rescue since I was 4. She is one of 10. We have 2 rescued thoroughbred horses who are going to be sent to slaughter after their race careers ended. We have 3 dogs. She's just the smallest and most portable. She's also the one who's been shot 3 times with a BB gun. And she also had 2 massive hernias. Her toenails are long now because she won't let me trim them, but she'll get them trimmed when she gets her dental cleaning soon. June 6th, probably.
Good to know.
But you know, but she's come a long way. She wouldn't let us touch her for the first 4 months that we had her. And I used to be a small animal vet tech, and I used to be a horse riding instructor, horse trainer, and in addition to the dogs and the horses, we have 2 cats and 3 birds. So I don't know anything about birds. I'm learning as I go. But I'll tell you, Aria here she has luxating patellas too, so her knees pop out of joint all the time. But I'm telling you, this dog, Pasadena Humane, found homes for the other 2 puppies. My friend adopted one. They were both her puppies. And she was completely emaciated and was covered in fleas, and it was horrible. I have videos. I'm happy to show you. She was terrible. It'll depress you, and then you see her now, so you'll be happy. But they told me that she was unadoptable. And I was working with Bark Avenue Foundation at the time. They're a low-cost spay and neuter organization that's a nonprofit. Please make a donation to them if you can. Bark Avenue Foundation. They work all through LA County. They're great, and they helped me pull her from the shelter because I didn't have the right clearance as an individual. But here she is, a little over a year later, and she is part of our family now. So, and Animal rescue. Can I give her up here?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Because she's my baby. All right. Gooby.
Sweet baby.
And all my other pets are
Who
black.
wants to go next? Okay, Brian.
I'll go. So we talked about this a little later. I was going to sing a rendition of, My Shot from Hamilton, and Lisa convinced me you didn't need to suffer through that. So I figured right now, gun safety measures are at the top of everyone's mind. I had the real pleasure to study from some of the greatest constitutional scholars in America, to work for the federal judges on the Ninth Circuit who decide these issues. So I wanted to do a quick discussion of the Second Amendment and how to talk to people who say we can't put these protections in place because the Second Amendment is there. And so real quickly, oh no. So we got the First Amendment, right? Which says Congress shall make no law whatsoever prohibiting free speech. And yet, even with that there, the courts are very clear. There are limits on that. You can't yell fire in a theater. There's defamation, libel, slander laws. So we have those restrictions, even though it says no law. So now you go to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, right at the bat, calls for a well-regulated militia. Well-regulated, it's right there. And for hundreds of years, the Supreme Court and the other federal courts in this system have upheld numerous protections. Let's go to the next one. A lot of people talk about the Heller case. This is D.C. v. Heller, which gun rights advocates say this is so good for them. It showed you can't put any limitations in place. But the majority opinion still said, like most rights, the Second Amendment right is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever, in any manner whatsoever, and for whatever purpose. For example, concealed weapons prohibitions, possessions of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing condition and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms are all allowed. And just since 2008, we have had federal courts uphold bans on the AR-15, concealed carry, large capacity magazines, universal background checks, waiting periods, age restrictions, and more. These are all upheld. We can protect our communities. The Second Amendment, the Supreme Court is clear. It is only weak people in Congress who refuse to protect us.
I think we should give a round of applause to Nicole for the lovely. Okay, so I have to tell you about the process of this little part and how we decided what we were going to do. So originally I was going to bring a dog. I also have 4 rescue dogs and a horse and goats. We talked about trying to bring the goats, but they don't transport well.
Vote goat.
Yeah, that vote goat. There you go. And so we were going to bring a dog, but since our dogs are rescues, we kind of rolled them out pretty quickly because one of them throws up in the car. The other one his name is Psycho, and there's a reason for that. And one of them is very old, and then the last one is we just didn't know how she'd do. She's a rescue husky, and they're just questionable anyway. So then I asked my husband, what are we supposed to do? And we were talking about it with the team, and Kenny's like, you should challenge them to an arm wrestling match. So if anyone wants to arm wrestle, really. Many of you might have seen my rock climbing ad, so I guess I have kind of strong arms. But then the last thing was, well, if you're not going to be able to arm wrestle, and it looks like these tables might be a little bit questionable, then I should just do a cartwheel. So I will do a cartwheel. I did gymnastics for like 10 years, and this is why I'm wearing pants. I'm going to give this a win.
Do you need more room? Ready? I was wondering why you... Woo! I was wondering why you had those weird leggings on under your dress the whole night. I was like, those are weird Spanx. Amazing. Thank you guys so much for being such great sports, for sharing a little bit of your hearts with us and where you are on the issues. We really appreciate it. And thank you to this great crowd. Thank you for being here. And I just want to remind everyone that there's drinks and food, and you'll be able to mingle a little bit with the candidates. And I hope you have a nice